Gabi Lowe. This is episode 5. Gabi, thank you so much for joining us for our podcast series, and I'm looking forward to chatting to you.
Morning, Belinda.
Morning. So I thought maybe what we could do is we could start off with just a little introduction of who is Gabi, and a little bit about why I've asked you here today.
No problem. So, yeah, as you said, I'm Gabi Lowe. Who is Gabi? Gosh, that's a big question. The short answer to that is Gabi is the wife of Stuart Lowe, who passed away 5 months ago from multiple myeloma. I'm also the mother of Jenna Lowe, who is very well known in South Africa, who also passed away. My oldest daughter passed away nearly 10 years ago now. And she ran a campaign called Get Me to 21 that went viral in South Africa. That was to garner support and advocacy for a very rare illness that she had, which is called pulmonary hypertension, and to increase the amount of organ donors in South Africa, which she did. She managed to single-handedly increase the organ donation rate by 287% in 3 months with her campaign.
Wow.
And I'm also a life coach. I run 2 practices, the Coaching Nest and the Resilience Factory, and a not-for-profit organization called the Jenna Lowe Trust, with a clinic at Grooterskuur for other patients with her illness. So that's me in short.
Thank you, Gabi. So today I asked you to chat a little bit about your role as the wife of a cancer survivor, and at the time, he had been diagnosed with cancer, and you lived the life of being the supporter, the carer, the everything to a cancer survivor, and then someone that eventually went on to pass. So maybe you could just start off by just a little bit about Stuart. Tell us a little bit who he is, who he was, and I still have to pinch myself and remind him that he's no longer. He was very active with living with cancer. So maybe you could just start off telling us a little bit about Stuart.
He was the love of my life, my husband of 34 years, and a soulmate, a best friend, an unbelievable father to Jenna, my oldest daughter, and Christy, my youngest daughter, who's now 27. He was also extraordinarily funny. He had such a quick wit. He was, alive with humor, but there was always something of value below the humor. He was a big soul and a big character. Everybody who met him remembered him and loved him. He was deep, had an unbelievable value system. He was someone who gave back. He was bright. Yeah, he was an extraordinary human being.
Would you mind just talking us through when he was diagnosed, what happened? Just tell us a little bit about the story, about the history of his journey, of his cancer journey.
With pleasure. Yeah, it's actually quite a dramatic story because Jenna, my eldest daughter, as I said, she was diagnosed with an extremely rare lung condition called pulmonary hypertension, and it was in the middle of that fight, and it really was a fight, a battle, to get into the country everything that she needed in order for us to improve her quality of life and to try and keep her alive as long as possible. She was 17 when she was finally properly diagnosed, and in the middle of that, whilst we were fighting for her life as a family, Stu was diagnosed with multiple myeloma. But at the time, he was what you might call, what they call smoldering. It's an awful word, but so he hadn't broken out yet, and he wasn't in the need of treatment other than bone density infusions. And he decided to keep it a secret until he didn't need to anymore. And I tell you why is that it really was an epic battle that we were involved with Jen. And Stu believed that he didn't want her to know. And he didn't want me to have to face that while we were fighting for Jenna's life. And then Jenna was eventually listed for a double lung transplant. And we went to Johannesburg when she finally got her lungs We left Cape Town, flew up to Joburg, and she needed to have a double lung transplant at Mill Park Hospital. And we were in ICU there for 6 months with her. And I don't know how many people listening have been in ICU, but it's a brutal, brutal, brutal environment. And to be in ICU for 187 days is outrageous. And in that time, his cancer broke out. So we lost Jen on the 8th of June, 2015, and he started to get properly sick. But we were also in the immediate throes of terrible, terrible grief and actually post-traumatic stress because it had been hectic. And I'm convinced that that extraordinary stress of the hospital and watching Jen die a slow and awful death had a lot to do with him breaking out. And to be honest, he told me 6 months after she died. So we had our first Christmas without her. And then a few weeks later, he sat me down and he said, I have to tell you, I don't know how to tell you this, but I have to tell you, I have cancer. And I just couldn't believe it. I mean, we were still both broken humans at the time. And he had to go the very next week for his first round of chemo. And within 3 months of that, we were back in transplant because he had a bone marrow transplant. So the memory of those years is hectic. It was unimaginable amounts of stress. And going back into transplant when I hadn't quite recovered, and neither had he, and neither had Christy, emotionally from what we'd witnessed Jen go through was quite something. So back into isolation. And that was the beginning of the cancer journey. We were told in the beginning, and it is true of multiple myeloma, that the majority, I suppose the bell curve, you can't always trust that though, is 3 to 5 years. And Stewie, he fought and fought, and he lived for 10 years with his illness.
Yeah. So you spoke about the trauma going through as a family that you went through with the loss of your daughter. What can you just describe from a carer's perspective, from a wife's perspective, from a partner's perspective, what were some of your emotions and feelings around the cancer?
So having been through what we've been through with my niece before Jenna, then Jenna, I knew what we were in for, right? And so it's the kind of experience you don't really wish that you were good at and knew how to do, but it was very helpful. I know that sounds weird, with Stu, that as a family, we had been through 2 rare diseases now. Natalie had cancer at the age of 10 before. And all 3 of these conditions, Natalie's cancer, Jenna's lung condition, and Stu's cancer, were rare diseases. And there's a way to cope with a rare disease which requires collaboration. It requires being completely involved in accessing new medication. It requires staying on top of the research. It requires making sure that you are active in the treatment, because it's not all known all of the time. And I know it sounds weird, but we were good at that as a family. We knew how to do that. We had developed those skills. So at first, because it was still so raw, the grief with the loss of Jen was still so raw, it was really, really tough to carry that enormous grief and the knowledge that I would eventually lose my husband, the love of my life. And so, but what I've learned over the years is not to live in the future, but to live with what you've got, right? Stay where you are. And so that was one of many things that we used to help us through, was to stay with where we were. Right now, you are well. You are well enough to have treatment. And Stuart was incredibly brave. I think that having witnessed Jen, and Jenna was also ridiculously, she had so much courage and bravery and dealt with her illness with such grace. that he would say to me, there were times in his illness and his treatment that he really was suffering. And he would say to me, this is not suffering. Because we had this ridiculous benchmark of what Jen had been through and what Natalie had been through. And so he was never a victim in his diagnosis or in his treatment. He was on chemo just about every week, sometimes every 2 weeks, for 10 years. I know people who go through chemo for 3 months and it breaks them. He was on chemo for 10 years and he just handled it in the most extraordinarily brave way. And I think I need to be clear that when I say brave, this doesn't mean I pretend this isn't happening to me. It means I bear it with grace.
Thank you. You've started answering the next question was, how did Stuart take the diagnosis, and what was his approach? And you spoke about the brave. Did Stuart ever appear to be angry or frustrated or, disillusioned about his cancer?
No, that is the truth. And I know it sounds bizarre, but I think near the end there was some anger for us that we had to say goodbye, that I know so many marriages that aren't good marriages and they still have each other. There was possibly some sense of unjustness and unfairness, but I also know, and so did he, that this is not somebody sitting up there saying you deserve this. It's not, it's random. So, but yes, of course, there's naturally some anger, but he was not an angry person. And I think that also what Stu brought to his illness that a lot of people don't is kind of an irreverence. And I mean, you knew him, so he was a big thinker. He was a strategic thinker. He was a liver. He lived life. And what I can say about him is that throughout his diagnosis and throughout the treatment, even when doing really difficult treatment, we lived life. We didn't give up living life. And I think that that's really important, is to consistently engage in life, not to only identify with the deathly, but to identify with living whilst you are in treatment and whilst you are moving towards death slowly. The point is that you are still alive and you need to engage in life. And I think we learned that lesson from Jen, to be quite honest. She was extraordinary that way. And that made it a lot more bearable, that he was never a victim of his illness, ever. And I also think that if you empower yourself as a patient, if you learn about your illness, if you learn about the upcoming treatments, he was constantly researching new treatments. And we fought to bring those into the country. They weren't registered. They were not paid completely by medical aid. All of that we did with Jen, we were doing all over again. And either you can go, oh, woe is us, shame, can you believe we're doing this again? Or you can just get on with it and say, well, we are. And so we are going to do it, and we're going to do it with grace. And we are also going to live our lives. And living your life means staying again in the present and not living in the past or in the future, but staying where you are, which sounds so simple, and it's not easy to do.
So how did you do it, Gabi? So what some of the, I think whenever I engage with someone that's just been diagnosed, we often talk about how does the family cope, and how does my partner cope, and etc. And then I'll have conversations with the family and the partner, and they always feel almost helpless. What can they do? And they want to get involved. And often the person that's being diagnosed puts on a brave face, and they right up until the end they'll keep on the brave face, or they'll fall apart. But mostly the brave face. That's what I've often mostly seen, is most cancer patients really, show strength. What would you say? How did you guys do it, especially yourself and your daughter? How did you live? Give us some insight, just so that we could maybe help others.
I think that the most important thing is that the brave face doesn't become a mask for something else that's going on behind the mask. That is really important. So rule number one, talk. Talk, talk, talk. Literally have the difficult conversations, have the courageous conversations. Always know where you stand, what's going on, how he's feeling, how you're feeling, how Christy's feeling. I think that honesty is absolutely vital, because what we know is, as humans, we only feel deeply connected if there's honesty and trust between us, right? And the only thing that makes living with a rare illness worthwhile is connection, human connection. So if you are going to pretend, and you're going to go into the land of pretense and a mask and a brave face that is masking something, you're going to miss out on intimacy and connection, and then you are not living together. So first and foremost, courageous conversations, constantly check in with each other and be honest. That's the important thing. The other thing is not to focus on what you can't do and what you're losing, but to focus on what you can do and what you have. So a positive bias rather than a negative bias, but a realistic positive bias. Okay, so this week treatment's not going great. You're feeling really shitty. So we can't go out to the wine farm for lunch like we planned. Let's get 3 or 4 of our friends here. We'll sit around the bar, we wrap you in a blanket, you lie on the couch, and we still have our friends. Or we need to cancel that trip because we need to be close to the hospital. And yet again, we've got to cancel a trip, but we're not going to go there. What we're going to do is instead, we're going to go up to Azefontein for a night and walk on the beach and come back in time for treatment. We're not going to roll over and say, we're never going to do anything. I've got to stay close to the hospital. I can't live. Yes, we're going to stay close to the hospital, but we're still going to do things that bring us joy. Okay, so this week, you can't climb the mountain. And that brings us so much joy. We love to climb the mountain. But what can we do? We can take our dog down to the river. We can sit there with a glass of wine or a bottle of water, and we can still get out. We can still experience nature. So yeah, very often he would go out to friends or to a dinner or to a walk feeling really awful, but he would go anyway because there was still value to be had in connecting with friends. And then the minute he was there, he would start to feel a little better. I think that, yeah. And then the other thing is to be realistic. Positive, but realistic. And constantly adjust to your new normal because it's changing all of the time.
I just love the authenticity and the rawness in what you said. And I think often the conversations are not real and raw because you want to live in the, you need to be positive. And I'm sure right up until the day he passed, it sounds as though you always had honest conversations. And I think that's so important for you in your healing process and for him in being able to be vulnerable and honest. So I think that's such beautiful advice. Thank you. So tell me, in terms of his role in cancer, so you spoke about some of the work that he used to do about getting, obtaining clearance for some of the medication and the treatment. Do you want to share a little bit about that journey?
That was an ongoing part of our journey. Was making sure that that you collaborate with your doctors and your healthcare providers, right? So that you don't just sit and wait to be told what's next, that you actually get involved, you do the research, you know what people are working on, what the latest stuff is that's up and coming, because there's always a way to step over hurdles. And yeah, it takes effort and hard work, but there's always a way. So for the last 4 to 5 years of his life, he was consistently on a drug that was not available in South Africa. So for the last 4 to 5 years, we were consistently finding the next thing, getting permission to bring it into the country, getting permission to import it, then battling with our medical health insurance to get them to to pay some of it, and then finding or raising the funds to pay for the rest. So all of those things take effort, input, a circle that you can rely on, that you can draw on, that can help you, and consistent sort of discipline around getting that right, because the paperwork involved, the getting the permissions from SAPRA, the import licenses, all of that, it really takes effort. Is it worth it? Yeah, we got 5 more years with Stu. Of course it's worth it. But you have to become actively involved in your own illness, in your own diagnosis, in your own treatment, and in your treatment plan. And I would advise any patient to do that. It was interesting. I could always tell, okay, I need to be careful what I say, but you can tell when somebody comes into the ward for treatment, how they are coping. And it's true, those that are filled with anxiety and resisting the disease, resisting the treatment, resisting the experience, probably have a worse outlook and have a worse outcome. There's definitely something to be said for leaning in, embracing it, and saying, okay, what can I do? And letting go of what you can't do. I can't change the outcome. Ultimately, we couldn't change the outcome, but we did buy another 5 years. And I'm so grateful for those.
Thank you so much for that. And I think you're so right. The positive outlook and the determination, I do think, does change your journey. I recall with mine, I always knew that I was going to make it. I was told 5 years, it's now 8 years later. And I 100% believe it's that frame of mind and how you approach it, even right up until the end. I mean, I remember chatting to him, and we were looking for the next one, and I was like, wow, just such a fighter, such an amazing man.
Absolutely. We were looking for the next one right up until the very end. And there was something about his irreverence, I used that word earlier, that was really useful for him. So the nurses absolutely loved him, and everybody knew him because he just had this unbelievable energy, and he was always helping other patients in the ward. But he was also irreverent. Like sometimes I'd go and visit him, he's having treatment, and he would literally unplug his own drips and say, no, I need some sunshine now. And he'd walk out, and nurses running down the passage, where are you going, Mr. Lowe? I'm just going to get some vitamin D. Calm down, I'll be back. And just, I think that zest for life and that ability to not always take everything too seriously. You know, he got the balance right. I was always the terribly serious one in the relationship, and he got that balance right. Like he could laugh at life and at himself. And I think it's an extraordinary characteristic that I wish I had.
Beautiful. So, Gabi, they say statistically 70% of marriages fail after one of the parties have been diagnosed with cancer. Share a little bit about how did you guys make it work?
Yeah, it's a big question. So I think that statistic is even worse when you talk about the death of a child. So we've been through 3, right? So we lost our niece to cancer, and this, as you've probably realized, is a very close family. So she was almost like another child. Then we lost our Jen, and then we had to face Stu's journey. So I think it's a multi-layered question, and there's a lot to that answer, but obviously let's try and keep it brief. The most important thing, open communication. We've been there already. And when I say open communication, I mean really open. So for instance, during Jane's journey in the last 2 years of her life, what did we do as a family? We had a therapist who was also a meditation expert come to the house every 2 weeks. We sat in a circle as a family. We did a listening meditation. We each spoke about where we were at within this journey. Every single time, everybody was on a different page. Nobody got to criticize. No one got to say, oh, but don't feel that, feel this. We just listened to each other in a held and facilitated space. And in the final year of Stu's life, we called her back in because for him and I, it was starting to become tricky. And you need to know that it will, because when someone's facing their own mortality, of course they're going to change. They're facing the biggest thing in life. They are going to change, and you need to change with them, or to be open. There needs to be, you need to be intimate enough, and I use that word carefully because people think intimacy is about sex. It's not. It's intimate enough, as in trust each other enough to show each other your vulnerability. And the closer somebody gets to death, the harder that is. Weirdly enough, people think it's the other way around. For me, all my experience, all 3 times of being very close to death or experiencing death, is that the very much closer you get to the end, the harder it is to be really, really vulnerable and open. So have the conversation, say the things you want to say before you get there. Talk, tell the person what they mean to you. Tell the person what you're struggling with. Tell the person what your challenges are. Listen to what their challenges are. They're going to be different. And you have to find a way to hold space for each other. So when I say communication is everything, I mean the difficult communication. It's hard. But we also held sacred our relationship. So there's him, there's me, and there's the relationship. It's almost like a third entity. And how do you do that when you're going through real trauma? With kindness. Kindness and empathy. Always give each other the benefit of the doubt. Always come at something with generosity of spirit. What is going on for him and what is going on for me? And very often they're different things. And then, specifically with cancer patients, one of the hardest things for us that we talked about openly, thank heavens, is that very often with cancer patients, they'll also be on steroid treatment. Stu was on very hectic steroid treatment. And it changes somebody's personality. And that was hard. But we had to talk about that. And we had to agree on ways to deal with that. So then when he wasn't on the steroids, then we could have those conversations, because when he was on the steroids, it was hard to have those conversations. And then we'd say, okay, these are the things we're going to put in place. So for instance, he knew that if I said, okay, Stewie, I'm stepping out of this. This is getting steroidy. I'm going to leave the room. He knew. Yeah, you've got to be able to talk about everything. Kindness is everything, and then remaining a team. What's your role? What's my role? What can I do? What can you do? And not going, I keep saying it, don't go into victimhood. Because the minute you go into victimhood, oh, woe is me, poor me, you become completely disempowered. Totally disempowered. And then the more disempowered you are, the more victim-y you feel, and it becomes this downward spiral. You are responsible for your own emotional, mental, and physical well-being. Nobody else is. So hold on to that.
So beautiful. And wow, some basic stuff, but so, I think, stuff that we forget about. And I just love the word kindness. That has always been a very strong value for me, is kindness. And I think it's hard. It's hard when you're hurting, when you're in pain. It's hard to be kind. Wow. You are a phenomenal woman.
Oh, gosh.
I look at you in awe, and I think you've gone through so much pain, so much loss, so much of giving to others. How did you pick up the pieces? I mean, I know it's only 5 months, but you look fantastic. You sound so positive. How? What's your secret?
Yeah, look, it's still very early days of grief, and to be honest, because that's just who I am, the layers and layers of grief are still revealing themselves. What I find astounding, I've read it in every single book I've ever read about grief, is every loss is unique. So yes, there are some similar themes that we'll all have in grief, and there's some things I can tell you that I do that help, that I know will help anyone going through loss, and we'll talk about those. But each loss is unique in its own right. And I think we really need to remember that every time we come across someone who's lost someone, please don't tell them, oh, by this time it's going to be this. And by that, it doesn't work like that. Everybody's grief is different. And allow them that, allow them their grief. And so for me at the moment, I think that with Stu's death, let me put it this way, with Jen's death, it was just horrific. It was like somebody really ripped my body in half, actually. And the big difference is we were fighting for her to live. We were fighting for her to live. With Stu's death, we were moving slowly towards his death. There was already an acceptance. We knew that the time window was closing. And we knew that every year that we bought, because literally it was buying it with expensive drugs, was exactly that. It was borrowed time. And so there was less shock involved. There was still shock, as in we thought we had more time. But so I think, if I look at it, that there was more of a level of acceptance, which has made this loss quite different. It's more of a like slow burn and layers of grief revealing themselves. And for me, one of the hardest things that I'm dealing with at the moment is the realization of all the spaces that he filled in my life, that when you become a team and a partnership like we were for so many years, that you almost take for granted. And I find myself writing to him in my journals and saying, you know, I hope you know how grateful I am and how much I love you. Because of course I always told him that, but yeah, I think the layers are still revealing themselves. So how do I cope? I cope by, friends are everything. I have an unbelievable support group, and I have taught myself, because it's not my natural way, to reach out when I need somebody. And sometimes that's the hardest thing to do. For me, I find it much easier to offer help than to ask for help. And for a lot of people, they find that. So I've taught myself that. But I also do a lot of practices that help me. So just about every single day I'm out there in nature. I'm walking either on the mountain or around the neighborhood or in Kirstenbosch. I am exercising. Apart from walking, I'm actually training as well. I'm journaling. Journaling is an incredible tool to process difficult emotion, because you need to write, not type. You are actually processing while you're writing. I meditate on a regular basis, even if it's short. If I don't have time, it'll be 5-10 minutes. But finding that peace within. And then the part that I suppose lots of us don't do is, when I need to, allow myself to really grieve. 2 weekends ago, as I was building up towards the weekend, I was like, I've been going too fast, too hard, doing too much. And I canceled all my plans. I got in the car, took my dog, and I went away on my own for 2 days. And I cried and I screamed and I shouted at the universe, and I came back lighter. You've got to allow yourself to grieve. And I think that sometimes when the pain is that deep, we have this fear that if we go there, we're going to get stuck and we're never going to recover. And the truth is the opposite. If you don't go there, you're going to get stuck, because what you leave in the dark festers. You have to go there. You have to allow yourself to grieve. And you've got to make space for that, because life goes on and life is fast and life is happening. And so you've got to make space for grief.
Again, such profound words, and often taken for granted. And sometimes people don't know how to do that. So thank you for helping them with some of the tools. Gabi, just in terms of where to from now for you, are you able to see your future? I know you speak a lot about the present and living in the present, but how do you balance it? Because there's hope for the future, but living in the present. So how do you do that?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, because it's quite nuanced, because it's about having a vision for the future, which for me, my vision is that I keep on telling myself, you're going to be okay in the end. So I know that, because if I could survive the loss of Jen and I got to a place where I was okay, I will do it again. And I've got another 30 years of life ahead. My goodness, I can either sit in a place that goes, how do I get through another 30 years without Stuart and without Jenna? And sometimes I do go there and I do feel that. Or I can say to myself, how do I honor them? Because they would be furious when they fought so hard for every day that they lived, that if I took 30 years and threw them away and didn't make the most of them and use them to make a difference in the world, both of them would be looking down at me going, you get off your butt. What are you doing? So I feel like choosing life honors the people that I've lost in a way that is really important to them and to me. I don't know exactly what that looks like. I have decided that I won't make any massive decisions in the first year at all, including leaving my home. I'm not doing that. I'm not making any decisions. No major decisions for at least the first year, maybe even 2. I'm carrying on with my practices. I love my coaching. I'm continuing with my coaching. And what that gives me is purpose. And I do believe that in some ways, suffering ceases to be suffering when you find meaning, when you find purpose, the suffering lessens. So I will carry on doing my work. I do feel like I need a break from rare disease, please. Just need a break from rare disease. And, you know, my Christy, my youngest daughter, she needs me and I need her. And we have come through this together with the most astounding relationship, which I'm so grateful for because it could have gone any way, you know, with so much loss. And she was so young when it all started that it really could have gone any way. And so also my other connections to my friends, to my family have become more significant and more important. Gee, I'm rambling. I forgot what the actual question was.
No, you answered the question beautifully. It was really all about moving forward and how do you do it. What I wanted to ask, and you started asking the question, is how has this experience specifically with Stuart shaped your outlook in life, specifically within the world of cancer?
So I think that advocating is so important. So use adversity as a platform for growth in whatever way you can, helping others, helping yourself, helping your family members. Whatever adversity comes your way, we all know no growth comes out of comfort, it only comes out of discomfort. So use that adversity as a platform for growth. And that will mean something different for each person. But that's how you get to a place of post-traumatic growth rather than post-traumatic stress disorder. And I think that's really, really important. And that's a conscious choice that we make every single day. Every single day we have to make that choice. So this journey with Stu, I mean, I think that it was astounding to watch him advocate for other people with cancer whilst he was battling his own journey and grieving the loss of his daughter and trying to run a business because the meds were really expensive and I was also working. But we knew, you know, financially we were under a lot of pressure. I also have to say that our circle of support has been extraordinary, and that for me it's really shifted something for me quite profoundly in terms of getting to understand in a deep way that giving and receiving are the same thing. They're one and the same thing. It's a virtuous circle. And Archbishop Desmond Tutu, love the man, you see him up there behind me. He said that. He talked about that in his Book of Joy, and he's absolutely right. Because you might not give back to exactly the person who's gifted you, but you are always giving back to someone else. And it's a virtuous circle. So that generosity gets passed on, gets passed on, gets passed on, gets passed on. So don't be afraid to ask for what you need and always give back.
Oh, that's beautiful. So some final words, if someone was listening to you today, and supporting someone through a loved one through their cancer journey, what would you want them to know?
No matter what the outcome, because often it's not what we want it to be. There's still life, and you will be okay. And even in death, you will be okay, as long as you hold space for each other and you don't lose connection with the people closest to you. That's the most important thing. You're not going to lie on your deathbed thinking, I wish I'd finished that stuff in my inbox. That's not what's on your mind. You're thinking, I wish I'd had that conversation. I wish I'd swum in the sea. I wish I'd worn that outrageous outfit. I wish I had gone away for that weekend and not said, I have to work. Choose life in the face of death.
It's beautiful. Gabi, thank you so much for your time. I have a million other questions, but it was wonderful just to get some insight. Thank you so much for sharing and be willing to go to a very, I'm sure, a very painful place. But this is how we honor him. So thank you. It was such a blessing when I met Stewie and his guidance and his support in living with cancer. So again, on behalf of Living with Cancer, thank you, and thank you for supporting him to be able to help us. And I wish you lots and lots of living. And thank you for just being that beautiful, bright, shining star for all of us to look up to. Thank you.
And thank you for the work that you do. Thanks, Belinda.
Thank you.